What's going on, everyone? Welcome into the 24th episode of Jack's Mailbag, the series where I answer your Gamecock athletics questions. If you have a question you want answered on next week's episode, be sure to drop it in the comment section below on this YouTube video, or I'll have a post on the Insiders Forum on GamecockCentral.com exclusively for GC members and subscribers, where you can ask any and all of your questions that you have on the next episode. And speaking of which, if you're not a Gamecock Central member or subscriber, we're running a limited time offer right now where you can enjoy 50% off. That's right, 50% off an annual membership with the promo code in all caps, kickoff24 exclamation point. Again, that's kickoff in all caps, 24 exclamation point for all complete, in-depth, on the ground, accurate coverage of South Carolina athletics. And you get to be on the Insiders Forum where you can chat with any and all Gamecock fans, myself, Wes, Chris, our boss Shu. You can have so much fun interacting with fellow Gamecock fans who are just as passionate about not just college football, but sports and other things like that in general. So it's a great deal, great offer. Again, it's a limited time deal. So you definitely want to get on that if you haven't already. And it gives you exclusive access to asking any questions you have for the next episode of Jack's Mailbag. Because if you don't know, majority, if not all, the questions I get each week come from the Insiders Forum when I post for people to ask about Jack's Mailbag and what questions they have. So definitely take advantage of that if you haven't yet already. But happy Friday, first off. Happy game day eve. We are officially on the back end of the countdown watch. South Carolina will kick off the 2024 season against Old Dominion on Saturday, August 31st, which is tomorrow at the time when I'm recording this. And it should be a great season. Going to be a lot of fun. Still going to be doing Jack's Mailbag every week. And I'm hopeful it'll be a great year for South Carolina as they look to bounce back after going 5-7 last year. But we've got a lot of questions to answer this week. So without further ado, let's get into our first question from Steve Chandler, 8487. I know we have a good D line and pretty good linebackers and really good safeties, but not sure about the corners. Could you talk about them and our depth there? Yes, of course. So you look at what South Carolina's got in the secondary. At like you said, like you mentioned, at safety, they're really good. You're gonna have DQ Smith and Nikki Minwari, both back for their third year as starters in the secondary there, and backing those guys up. You're gonna have David Busey, Gerald Kilgore backing up Eamon Wari, and then Peyton Williams, a redshirt sophomore, backing up DQ Smith. And then you talk about the corners. It was a real battle over there. Obviously O'Donnell Fortune was going to be the starter coming out of camp. That had been the case really since the spring. Then you look at who could potentially be backing him up or playing opposite of him. Your options were Emery Floyd, Vakari Swain, David Spalding, and Judge Collier. But it looks like O'Donnell Fortune is going to be starting at one of the cornerback spots. Backing him up will either be, because it's listed as an or on the depth chart right now for South Carolina. It'll either be Emery Floyd or David Spalding. However, I expect those guys to both end up playing on Saturday, just because it's that type of game where you can probably get those guys in if the score is in a good spot. And then at the other cornerback spot, it's also listed as an or. So either of these guys will start. But I think Judge Collier would probably start on Saturday over Vakari Swain. But again, I could be wrong on that. That's just how I feel about it. It seems like Judge has been having a really good preseason. So we'll have to see what happens there. But that's some good options that you have over at the cornerback spot and in the secondary. Next question comes from Garnet Mountains, who asks, do you think both quarterbacks will play this Saturday? I do. So Lenore Sellers won the starting quarterback job, not to really much of a surprise of anyone, and will be starting his first game at South Carolina as a redshirt freshman on Saturday against Old Dominion. Really exciting times for this program with a homegrown talent that comes from the Florence area. So not too far from here, and he makes his first start after redshirting last year, working behind Spencer Rattler. And when he got into games last year, he performed pretty well, although it was really just limited and sparing action. Um, but Robbie Ashford is another name to keep an eye on because he's the backup quarterback to Sellers, and he seemed to have a pretty good camp as well. I think in anyone's right mind, he probably wasn't going to win the job. I mean, you give him a shot to, but it really just, I mean, this was Sellers' job to lose, in my opinion. But with Ashford, he did tease a few weeks ago when we spoke to him in a media availability that you could potentially see South Carolina. Now, I don't know how much I believe it, but South Carolina potentially running a two quarterback system where, and this is how I could see it happening. Again, this is just my thought process and prediction. I could see South Carolina doing something where it's a fourth down, third down situation where it's third, maybe fourth and short, and you need a few extra yards. I would think that's when Robbie Ashford, a big body just like Sellers, comes into the game and gets in and pummels over a few defenders to get the first down. I think that's probably where you use him. You could also have some specific packages laid out for him. I'm not sure. But I also just think in general, Robbie will probably play as a normal quarterback late in the second half, just because I haven't given a score prediction yet, but I do think South Carolina is going to be able to win pretty convincingly. I think they'll win by maybe 2 touchdowns. And I don't know if they'll cover the spread. I think last time I checked, it was at 19 and a half. That's a lot to cover against the Sun Belt team. But my point is, I think he is going to play tomorrow on Saturday against Old Dominion. It'll definitely be later in the game, and it just depends on how the score goes. If the score is in hand enough to where it's like, okay, you feel comfortable bringing in Robbie, then I think you go ahead and do it. Next question comes from K20, who asks a 4-part question here. Leading rusher Saturday, leading receiver Saturday, surprise performance, punt return, kick return. So I'll start in reverse order. With punt return, it's going to be Juju McDowell listed as the starter, and then Gage Larvadane as the backup. And then kickoff return, it's also Juju and Nick Harbor alongside with him. So those guys will be handling those duties on special teams. And then the surprise performance for me, I'm not sure, to be honest. I think Vandravius Jacobs. I know that's a popular name right now because all I see on Twitter over the last few days is people just commenting hashtag Vandravius. I don't know why. I mean, it's funny, I guess. I'm just confused. I don't understand the concept behind it. But and anyway, I think Dre Jacobs could have a really nice game on Saturday, and I'll couple that with the fact that I think he's going to. He might be the leading receiver, but I'll go with him as the surprise performance, and then leading receiver on Saturday. I'm going to give it to Jared Brown. I think South Carolina is going to have a by committee receiver room this year, obviously, because Shane Beamer and Dallin Loggins have both spoken about that being the case. And, they don't have Xavier Legette this year, so they don't have that true number one receiver, and no one's really separated themselves yet. However, I do think Jared Brown can be that guy for South Carolina this year. And I do think he will get bulk of the receptions tomorrow. And it's up to him what he does from there. So I'm going to go with Jared Brown probably as the guy to be the leading receiver on Saturday. But it wouldn't surprise me if Dre Jacobs had a nice day too. Maybe catches a touchdown or something. And that'd be the surprise performance that, really steals the show, maybe. I'm not sure. Leading rusher, I think Rocket Sanders is going to have a nice day. I really couldn't tell you, but I think we're going to see Lenore Sellers maybe be the leading rusher tomorrow. I just had that weird feeling that we don't know what South Carolina's offensive line is really going to look like yet until we get into that, in the Williams-Brice Stadium and we see it for ourselves. I think we're going to see some situations where the pocket's going to collapse and Sellers is going to be on the run a little bit. I think that's where you probably see some of those longer runs maybe that he'll have, and that just adds to his rushing numbers. Again, that all depends on how many times he gets sacked, because you get sacked, you lose yardage. So that number could be different, but I'm going to go with Lenore Sellers right now. Next question comes from Cocky C137. Defensive tackle recruiting. Besides Caleb Williams, are there any likely prospects considering the Gamecocks? The position is deep, but not so much going forward. Who on the team is left at the position next season? So you look at what they got for next season. Tonka Hemingway is more likely than not going to the NFL. You'll get TJ Sanders back if you want him back. You won't have Kyle Kennard. You probably won't have Boogie Huntley. You're not going to get Jules back. Um, you'll get Brian Thomas probably back. Dylan Stort will be back. Des Umanzula will be back. No Gilbert Edmond. Monkel Goodwine, you could probably get him back. Nick Barrett, potentially, I think, as well. Those are just some of the options. Again, this is just speculation. I'm not exactly sure on who I think will come back, but that's just what I'm thinking. Now, in terms of recruiting, you got for 2026, South Carolina. Here's some of the guys South Carolina is supposedly potentially targeting right now. You got an edge from Myers Park in North Carolina, Rodney Dunham. You got another edge, Bryce Robinson from Kell, Georgia. You also have from Dutch Fork right around here, Julian Walker. And then you look at the 2027 class. I mean, South Carolina is definitely targeting the defensive line position at edge. You got Deontay Seals from Hewitt Trustville, Alabama. And then right here at Football City, USA in South Point, you got edge Seth Tillman for 2027. So South Carolina is definitely targeting some guys on that D line, specifically at edge. But I do think they're in a good position to where they'll get enough guys back next year. And then you also get whatever recruits you bring in and then transfer portal. So I wouldn't be too concerned. South Carolina, with the way the transfer portal is, South Carolina will be able to replenish and bring in new guys to fill the voids at whatever positions you really need to. Not just D line, but literally any spot. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. Hampton Rhodes asks, any news on the baseball team? Not much, really, to be honest. It's a little slower right now because, the off season is kind of, at least to me, kind of over at this point. The first time we'll see the 2025 team in action will be September 30th when fall practice begins for the Gamecocks for the 2025 season. And that'll be the first time, like I said, we see Paul Maneri coaching this team. I do know that they are back, school's back in action. So the team is back working out at Founders Park again. You saw some guys posting about it on their Twitters, Instagrams, whatever the case might be. So those guys are back, and it looks like they have a pretty good team for next year, to be honest. I think they're in a good spot. They got a lot of transfers coming in, a lot of returning faces, a lot of freshmen coming in. There's not enough spots for everyone because you got to bring the roster down to 40 at some point, and that has to happen by the time you have your scrimmages against Air Force and then Charleston later this fall. So there's definitely going to have to be some roster cuts. If I had to guess where the roster cuts will probably happen, it's probably going to be freshmen who might not play, or just guys in general that might not see a lot of playing time. And it's like, hey, you could probably go transfer somewhere else and go see more playing time. I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. But again, that's just my thought process on it. Next question comes from Cox by 20. How many turnovers on Saturday for both us and Old Dominion? So surprisingly, Old Dominion, whether you want to believe it or not, they last year they gained more turnovers than they lost turnovers. So they had, as a team, they lost 18 turnovers. So they turned the ball over 18 times. And they also, on defense, they forced 21 turnovers. So this is a team that is going to make more plays on defense than offense in terms of turnovers. But I do think we'll see Old Dominion. I think the offensive line, I don't know what they're going to look like. Getting up 62 sacks last year, and I know it's not all on the offensive line, but considering the offense gave up 62 sacks last year, I think South Carolina's going to try to exploit that again and bring pressure And I think we're going to see some hits on the quarterback and the running backs. And maybe I think South Carolina's going to force a fumble, and I think they're going to get 2 interceptions. So I'll say Old Dominion turns the ball over 3 times. South Carolina, I hate saying it, it wouldn't surprise me if they do force a turnover or 2 as well. But I'm going to say South Carolina only has 1 turnover on offense. Other than that, I think the Gamecocks will win the turnover battle and get this season off to a good start because you need the defense to have a great year, in my opinion. I definitely believe they can with all the talent they have. Next question comes from WDC for USC, who asks, when we finish 12th in the country this year, are we going to be bumped out of the playoffs by some non-Power 5 team? Wow, playoff talk. That's something. Me personally, I don't think this team's making the playoffs, but that's just me. I'm trying to be realist. I'm optimistic about this team, but playoffs, to go from 5-7 last year to playoffs, that's a lot to ask for. A lot would have to go right. You have to have a lot of upsets in there. However, let's just say hypothetically, WDC for USC is right. South Carolina's 12th in the country, end of the year. I think they get in. If you're 10-2 or 11-1, you probably will make the playoff as an SEC school. I think there's probably about 5 SEC schools right now that would make the playoff. But if we're talking about a group of 5 team knocking them out, again, the highest ranked group of 5 team will be in the college football playoff. So if there's let's say Boise State, for instance, is ranked 21st in the country, and there's no other group of 5 team higher than them, I think they would automatically just be ranked 12th in the polls or in the CFB playoff system. But if there's let's say Boise State or whoever is ranked number 10 in the country at the end of the year, they would be the 10th team ranked in the CFP playoff bracket. So it really just depends. I would think there'd have to be a lot of, if South Carolina manages to go 10-2 and they have wins over Alabama, Ole Miss, LSU, Clemson, teams like that, I find it hard to believe they'd be left out of the playoff. But they'd have to have some really bad losses to where it's if it comes down to a few teams and South Carolina just has a loss to Akron or something, for instance, or Wofford, then it's or Vanderbilt. If you lose some garbage, I don't even want to say garbage, but team that is lower than you, and you probably won't make the playoff if it comes down to something like that. But again, that's just me. So I don't think we'll have to be worrying about playoff, though. But again, it's all just how I think and feel. And our final question comes from 64 Cocky, who says, do you think game prep this week is solely on Old Dominion, or do you think we're peeking ahead to Kentucky? Absolutely not. The game prep is solely going to be on Old Dominion this week. It has been, it will be. You don't look ahead if you're South Carolina. If you're looking ahead, you're setting yourself up for failure as a team, in my opinion, at least. I think it would be foolish to look ahead. You don't overlook any opponent. We've seen upsets happen in college football. Heck, Old Dominion upset Virginia Tech a few years ago. So you know it's possible, and you don't mess around with the Sun Belt, because Sun Belt schools, look, you see South Alabama beating Oklahoma State last year in Stillwater. You go back to a few years ago, shout out Marshall. Marshall went on the road to Notre Dame and beat the Irish in South Bend 2 years ago. So it's definitely possible. But again, we'll have to see. I think South Carolina is in a good position this week to beat Old Dominion. I think the prep has probably been pretty good. They'll have a good game plan in place, and I expect this to be a good day for the Gamecocks, as I do believe they're going to start the year off 1-0. But that is going to do it for this week's episode of Jack's Mailbag. Again, if you have any questions you want answered on next week's episode, be sure to drop a comment on this YouTube video with your question, or I'll post on the Insiders Forum on GamecockCentral.com, where you can ask any and all of your questions. Be sure to stay locked into GamecockCentral.com for all live updates and coverage throughout the weekend as we get this football season underway on Saturday. And then on Sunday, I'm going to be running a special edition of GC Live every week, where I will be breaking down the game from the day before on Sunday. So be sure to stay tuned for that. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. Have a great weekend. Stay safe and enjoy the football game.